Some important things. Do we know where the restrooms are? Is that already talked about? Great. And feel free while I'm talking, go get coffee, water, bagel, cream cheese, whatever you want. If you need to go to the restroom, this is just going to be family here so that we can learn together about some very important things. So, how many of you have a cell phone? Raise your hand. Okay, good, the right audience. How many of you have an iPad? How many have a computer? How many surf the internet? How many have kids? How many have grandkids? Great. I just wanted to be sure I'm at the right place. So, why am I doing this, and why do we need net education? Well, first of all, children and adults lack e-maturity. We've had so much technology in such a short time that the ethics, the education, the understanding of it has not caught up. Just a few statistics. Teenage boys spend on average 11.3 hours per week playing video games. Teens spend 6.5 hours a day looking at screens. Largest consumer of internet pornography, 12 to 17-year-olds. The pornographers, it's the largest money-making business online. They have one goal. They want to have your children by the time they're 11 years old. That's their goal. 56% of all divorces are due to one spouse's relationship with pornography. 71% of teens have created online profiles. 56% of teens have no privacy settings on any of their sites. 35% of all downloads are for sexualized images. By the way, that's low. This was a year ago. I have no doubt that it's much higher than that now. 79% of teens' first exposure to pornography is at home. The average age of first-time exposure to internet pornography is 11 years of age. The average age of seeking professional help, 30 to 35 years of age. Now, those are just statistics. Statistics, you know, I'd zone out if I heard statistics. That doesn't mean anything to me. It's people. It's people's stories. It's the stories of the people that I see every day in my office. A dear woman, 65 years old, does online shopping in her isolation. $70,000 worth of debt on one credit card, $60,000 worth of debt on another credit card, 5 other credit cards that are secret and hidden. A 32-year-old military vet that served for 2 different times, downloading porn files 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week, didn't even know what he was downloading, didn't even take the time to look, not aware of the child porn that was embedded in the files that the FBI had been tracking and tracked to him. He is now serving 5 years in a federal penitentiary, and he's registered as a sex offender. Freshman in college. In high school, straight A's, scholarships to several colleges. He went to the college he really wanted to go to. He was cutting classes in college. Why? Because he was playing video games, World of Warcraft, 20 hours a day. High anxiety, depression. When he came to my office, he had flunked out of college. By the way, the majority of these folks that I'm going to share with you about, they are doing great today because there is healing and there's hope, but we must be educated. A wife, married for 15 years, 2 children, got involved in a chat room, flew to Tennessee to meet a man that she had never met before, abandoned her marriage, her children, and her life. A 16-year-old staying up all night on Snapchat, Instagram, had several secret phones. Parents don't know what to do. 22-year-old man, just married. I don't know if you've heard of PIED, P-I-E-D. That's porn-induced erectile dysfunction. This 22-year-old man, just married, has erectile dysfunction because of compulsive masturbation and pornography. A study that just came out this week out of Great Britain, 75% of 18 to 24-year-old men have porn induced erectile dysfunction. In Japan, they're having a huge problem with the drop in population because of porn-induced erectile dysfunction in young adults. 45-year-old man visiting porn at work, 4 to 5 hours a day at work. This is the second job that he's lost due to his porn addiction because his company, they were tracking all the computers. A father, a recovering sex addict, has been in recovery for 5 years. His wife is on social media 5 to 7 hours a day. Their 13-year-old son, video gaming, 3 to 5 hours a day. So, there's a problem. The most important thing I want to share is that what I'm talking about is about people. We are created for relationship. Relationship with other people, relationship with ourselves, and relationship with God. And what is interrupting that is relationship with the digital screen. And when there's a relationship with a digital screen, primarily, everything else suffers. Now, I don't want to come across that I'm all against internet. I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, I have a computer, I do most of my reading online. I read constantly to keep myself informed. I love to communicate with my kids through internet, through email, through Skyping. So it's a wonderful venue of communication and education. And as with anything in this world, things can get turned around and something positive can become negative. So we're going to back up and we're going to start with what are the basic needs of children. When babies are born, the primary need is attachment. Primary need, attachment. And what is attachment? It's to be seen, to be safe, and to be soothed. So what does being seen look like? When an infant cries, the caregiver figures out what the need is and meets the need. What is safe? The babies are protected from harm, physical, spiritual, emotional, sexual, and not terrified or frightened by the caregiver. What is soothed? Well, it's what Ben is doing in the back with his baby. The minute you hold a baby, it doesn't make any difference if you're 68 years old. The minute you hold a baby, you start doing that movement. That's soothing the baby. That's holding and comforting this infant. Now, when this attachment is formed, it's why babies are so cute. In the airplane, when you're sitting in a seat and there's a baby a few seats above you, ahead of you, and they turn around and they look, what do you see people doing? They make faces, they wave, they want to get that baby's attention. That's how babies are. They're so beautiful and they're like puppies. They just grab your attention. Well, God's made it that way so that they will be attached to adults. There was an experience that we had with our middle son, Danny. He and his wife and 2 children lived with us for 2.5 years while they attended seminary. It was a wild and crazy experience. And one time we were all sitting around the table at lunchtime dinner after church on a Sunday, and Elijah, who was about 3.5 years old at that time, started to cry. Just started to cry for no reason at all. Now, if that had been my family that I grew up in, my stepfather would have said, "Quit your crying or I'll give you something to cry about." What Danny did is he got out of his chair, he walked around, he got on his knees, he looked at Elijah in the eyes, being seen. And he said, "Elijah, what's the matter?" And Elijah kept crying and crying and crying. And then Danny said, "Elijah, use your words." Elijah kept crying and crying. And so then he said, "Elijah, it's okay. Use your words. Let me know what's going on inside." Being seen, being heard. And Elijah said through his tears, "I miss Grandma and Grandpa in Canada." They're from Canada. "I miss them." And so Danny said, "Oh, okay. Well, how about if right after we eat our supper, we go and call him so you can talk to him?" Now, what did Elijah do? okay. He was fine. He was being seen, heard, and soothed. That's the difference. And so then after dinner, no tears, he went and he talked to Grandma and Grandpa. When we are seen and soothed and we are safe in a reliable, consistent way, then we can attach to other people in relationships in a safe, secure way as well. We feel good about ourselves, good about connecting with others, and knowing that our needs will be met. This sense of security and relational attachment is the launching pad that teenagers, primary school age kids, go forth to discover the world. So this is the starting place, the most important part. Now, what I need to let you know is that the way God has formed us is our brain has tremendous plasticity, which means if, as I did, I grew up in a home where there was alcoholism, sex addiction, gambling, and absent parents. Well, so what does that mean? Does that mean there's no hope for me? Not at all. Because God is in the business of transforming lives. He does it over and over again. And as we give ourselves to Him, He takes that piece of clay and He transforms it. So, we are not perfect as parents. Trust me. We are not. We make mistakes constantly. If you've made mistakes with your children, not a problem. You just start today. You start today connecting with them. You start today connecting with yourself. When attachment comes from consistent interactions throughout our lives between that child and the parent, then what happens? Well, they are able to connect to themselves and others. What happens when it's not there? One of the things, because I love observing people, that I'm seeing more and more of, is I'm seeing young moms holding their babies and giving them the bottle or breastfeeding them, and the mom is on the phone, looking at her Facebook, scrolling. It's not by accident that when we hold a baby, that line of communication is right from the eye of the mom to the eye of the baby, from the eye of the daddy to the eyes of the baby. That's attunement and connection. And if the eye contact isn't there, the attachment won't be there as well. If the parent is not present emotionally, there won't be that attachment. If there's tension and anxiety in the home, there won't be that attachment. So these are babies. Now let's move to middle school kids, about 12 to 18. What phase are they in their lives? It's about identity. They want to know who they are. So it's either identity or it's confusion. And identity in this digital age is incredibly confusing. Because it used to be that when my kids were kids, they could try being anyone they wanted to be, and it was just visible to their parents, to their friends, and to their schoolmates. Danny, I talk a lot about Danny because we spent a lot of time praying for him. He now is a counselor working with at-risk students, but his best friend was the son of the pastor of our church. And he was a dear young man. He'd come over to our house wearing a shower cap. He wore a shower cap for 3 years, guys. He was practicing being who he wanted to be and not the son of the pastor. And because his parents loved him enough just to let him practice and be who he was, that's all he needed, was the freedom to be who he was and to practice. That's what happens with young people, is they practice being someone else. Now the problem nowadays is in this process of trying on new identities, constantly like clothes, teenagers also love their reflections. Have you ever noticed walking by the mirror, the teenager is looking in the mirror? Of course, we do it too. We just don't talk about it as much. And who are the mirrors in all of our lives? It's other people. If it's people that love us, that want the best for us, that care about us, they will be positive mirrors. If they are people that don't know us, that don't feel good about themselves, that want to put us down in order to feel better about themselves, the feedback loop that we get from them is going to be very, very different. Very different. So what's happening online is these young kids are putting their practicing identities out there for everyone to see, and they get feedback, negative feedback, about you wear glasses, you look funny, you're fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall, you're too short. And what then happens is that becomes interjected into how they feel about themselves, and they feel less than. And they begin changing to fit what they think everyone else wants them to look like, to sound like, and to be like. So that feedback inner loop, that feedback loop is limitless now. It used to be limited, no longer. So it's very difficult for teenagers, adolescents, younger kids, adults to balance their self with their cyber self. Who's real and who's of value? Image management becomes a full-time job. When this teen's image is constantly changing, and it is so visible, and it is so scrutinized, not in a positive way, there can be huge identity confusion. Now, one of the things to remember is that your kids are just normal. Between 12 and 18, narcissistic behavior is so normal. They do not have narcissistic personality disorder. They're just being kids. They are focused on themselves. They are more important than anybody else. That's normal. That's appropriate. The key is to keep their world safe enough so that the feedback loops are not distorted and that the feedback loop doesn't tear them down. The other thing that we can do as parents is to help them focus on their inner world instead of their outer world. How do we do that? Well, we model it. We model it by having relationships that are meaningful and valuable. We model it by not being on our digital devices all the time. We model it by sitting with our kids, our grandchildren, the neighborhood kids, and seeing who they are and finding out about their world. Some of the things that's happening that is tragic is that plastic surgeries among young adults has skyrocketed. Why? Because online they see all of these images, not just women, but men as well, young men, that have been photoshopped. And they compare themselves to the photoshopped images and they think, that's what I need to look like. That's what the norm is. That's what is acceptable. So it creates tremendous confusion and a sense of, I'm not enough. The other thing that's happening in this virtual mirror is sexualization, premature sexualization. All you have to do is walk into any department store, look at the clothes that they're selling for little girls from ages 3 up. The sexualization and the objectification of females is starting so early. What's feeding and fueling that is what is being seen online. We are not going to be able to prevent our children from being online. The critical takeaway that I want each of you to have today is to have knowledge and to educate yourselves so that you can be with your children and you can educate them. We live in a period of huge societal change. It is going so quickly that we don't even know how to talk about it. It's why this is so critical. One of the best ways to cope with this fast-paced, dramatic change is to become knowledgeable in what is and to become more and more present with yourself and with others. Why is a cyber world so mesmerizing? It's interactive. It's immersive. People get into it all the way. And it's incredibly engaging. The colors, the sound, it affects every sense of that person. So again, technology, it's not good or bad, it's neutral. It's how it's used. And one of the concerns that I have is that technology for many families is not being discussed, is not being talked about, is not being educated. It's like giving your kids the keys to your car at 9 years old and saying, go drive. They can't. They're going to crash. They aren't equipped and trained to do that. So let's talk about the essence of teenagers. Teenagers, they're in the process constantly of comparing. And when they compare online, they, again, as I mentioned before, they feel less than. This can create a detachment from who they are. And then they become attached to who they want others to view them as. And if your whole time during school, when you're at home, is about how do I present myself to others, then you don't have time alone to self-observe, to be self-aware, and to like who you are. And one of our roles as parents and grandparents is to help our children like who they are and to be comfortable with that. Let's talk a little bit about the neurobiology of teenagers. First of all, the prefrontal cortex is right here. That's the executive center of the brain. No surprise that the prefrontal cortex of a teenager is not completely formed until they're 25 years old. I bet you already knew that. You just didn't know why. That means they can't think things through. That means they can't think things through logically. They can't think things with impulse control or in a linear way. They can't, before 25 years old, they can't think that if I do this, this is going to happen. They are not wired to do that yet. So what do? Well, Mark Twain said you lock them in a box, you make a hole, and you feed them until they're 23. I don't think that's going to work. What we need to do is we need to be their prefrontal cortex. We need to help them know what's safe and what isn't. But trust me, one of the things about teenagers particularly is that they push the limits. They push the barriers. They are risk takers. They're adventuresome. They want to explore. That's wonderful. That's how God made them, so that they'll grow and expand. But it makes us scared to death because they're risk takers. So again, it's about educating ourselves, being present, and educating our children. And I'm going to tell you more of what we can specifically do. So, teens are drawn to the cyber world because their brains are wild for novelty and new information. Their judgment centers are still under construction. That's the prefrontal cortex. They may be drawn to inappropriate risk-taking content, including porn, violence, and internet traps. And there are many out there. Bullying, scams, exhibitionism, and a new one that we're seeing more and more of is cyberstortion. And what that is there's a tragic story. Amanda Todd came out a few years ago, 14-year-old girl. She had a webcam, which, by the way, you need to know is one of the things you really need to deal with your young children. It can be used in a very damaging way. She was this is all over YouTube, young girls, prepubescent and pubescent, that are doing very sexualized poses and dances and singing online because they're imitating what they're seeing the idols do. She was online singing and dancing, and then because, remember, this prefrontal cortex is not completely formed, all of a sudden she lifted up her tank top and flashed. What happened? Well, there are what are called trollers online constantly. They're called cappers. And they are trolling every site and looking for prepubescent and pubescent children that have been in any way at all showing sexualized images. They are taking these images and they are putting them in a file and they are disseminating it as child porn. This individual got this image, disseminated it, not only as child porn, but to everyone on her Facebook page. She didn't have any privacy settings. Then contacted her via email and said, unless you send me more sexual poses, I will send this out everywhere. She was too afraid to tell her parents. Divorced parents, 2 separate homes. So she got caught in this web. It continued for weeks, months. Her parents found out. They went to the police. Police couldn't do anything. They took her to another school. The individual followed her online. Don't ask me why the parents didn't shut down all of her computers and iPhones. And then they took her to another school. She went online and she shared how this ruined her life. She was 15 years old. 2 days after she went online and talked about what happened, she killed herself. This is very real. This is tragic. This is too much for teenagers to deal with. They cannot be left alone in this cyber world. They don't have the capacity to understand the consequences. This is very sobering. So, neurologically, the prefrontal cortex is not formed completely until 25. The brain develops from the back to the front. The part of the brain that is responsible for judgment, impulse control, and decision making and insight is not formed, which was evident in this poor young woman's life. Teens are drawn to the cyber world because their brains are wired for novelty and new information, as I shared before. And teens gravitate to low effort, high risk activities. Low effort, high risk. It's difficult for them to set time limits. I have to say it's almost impossible. It's difficult for them to move away from some content that is captivating, that is sensual, that triggers their yearning for novelty, curiosity, and to choose non-screen time activities. So what do parents do? Well, first of all, again, you're going to hear me say this all through this talk. You have got to be aware of what's going on. You have got to educate yourself. You must look at your own relationship with screen time. If you are modeling to your children that you're on the cell phone all the time, and that the cell phone is sitting right here when you're in the restaurant eating dinner, and every time it vibrates, you pick it up to check what's going on, you are letting your children know this is more important than this. And they learn what they see faster than your words will ever teach them. Now, so what are you going to do? You're going to get rid of cell phones for your kids? No. Cell phones right now, and for the rest of our lives, they are a part of the emancipation process for teenagers. However, I had a gentleman in my office a few months ago, and I was asking him how long his, he was a 14-year-old son. No, I think he was 11. His 11-year-old son was online. And he said, well, he's only online about 2 hours a night. Okay, that was a clue. How long is he online during the weekends? About 7 hours playing games. Well, what are you going to do about that? Is that problematic? Well, all of his friends do it. And he doesn't want to really spend time with us. So what's happening? We as adults are abdicating a very important role. We are abdicating the responsibility of knowing what is real and how it's affecting our children. And we are stepping back and letting the cyber world raise our children. So I'm going to talk about 3 areas: video gaming, social media, and cybersex. There are addictions that are what we refer to in the field that I practice in that are substance addictions, alcohol, drugs, substances. There are also process addictions. A process addiction is gambling, digital, porn, work, exercise, spending. Now, what's interesting is that we are now having enough information from PET scans of the brain that we see that the same neurobiological activity that occurs in the brain of a coke addict when they think about getting their next hit matches the brain activity in an individual when they think about playing their video game. That is powerful, folks. That's the pleasure center of our brain. That's the reward center of our brain. And neurochemically, that is more powerful than anything we can give our kids. The game developers know how to create a successful video game. I've worked with game developers before. They know. This is their livelihood. They are not going to change it. Intermittent reward. What is intermittent reward? If you've ever done a slot machine or seen one on TV, okay, you pull the little dealie down and the numbers go around and there's a 3 and there's a 5 and there's a 7, but you just know the next time you might get all 7s. So you do it again, and then there's 2 7s, and then there's a 5 or a cherry or whatever it is. And you know the next time you're going to get something, and then you get it. First of all, they're all rigged. They are rigged to have an intermittent reward, to keep you looking for more rewards. And what happens neurobiologically when there is an intermittent reward, when you get that hit, is you get a dopamine surge. And dopamine is the most addictive drug, chemical, that our body creates. Every individual that I've worked with, whether they are addicted to video games, social media, or porn, they are not addicted to the images. They are addicted to the dopamine surge. And the dopamine is powerful. What else do the game developers know? They need to have a compulsion loop. What does that mean? They need to have tasks that are repeatedly required to reach the next level. The next level. If you do this, you get this. But then you need to do this so you can get that. It's called a compulsion loop. Thirdly, it needs to cast a spell over the player. Colors, images, sounds, to make the play irresistible, such as World of Warcraft. The player is immersed in the environment to keep them playing as long as possible. Next, the players can game anonymously. It's very rewarding. They can be whoever they want to be. They can say whatever they want to say. And they're not going to get in trouble because they're not being themselves. They become the character that they represent with no fear of consequences. Lastly, the accessibility of the internet. They can be on the school bus on their cell phone and they're playing the game. In the middle of the night, they can still be on their device playing the game. One of the things that we're seeing in young adults and teenagers is anxiety disorders. It is rising significantly because of lack of sleep, because of the involvements that they are involved in with the cyber world and the pressures that that's putting on them. So, what happens neurobiologically when someone is playing video games? The dopamine is released in above normal amounts in the pleasure center and the reward center of the brain. It creates that good feeling, and it motivates the player to continue. Cortisol is also released. Adrenaline is released. That is where the active arousal increases. And then as arousal for the gaming increases, the areas of the prefrontal cortex, which remember, they don't have much yet, but they shut down. So what little they have shuts down while other parts of the brain become much more active. The arousal becomes more active. Judgment and decision making drop. The arousal increases, and it's what is called being in the zone. Everything else disappears. They are in a tunnel of the game. So how is this problematic? Well, one thing that happens, tolerance increases as the dopamine level increases. What is tolerance? That means, I really like this. This really feels good. But it's not feeling as good now as it used to. I need more. I want more to feel the same good feeling. This is the it's not enough syndrome. So that psychological engagement that creates this good feeling hijacks the neural pathway. And what is a neural pathway? Well, because I'm older than a lot of you, we used to, when we were kids, we had black LP albums with the grooves in them. Well, I share that with some of the kids I work with. They don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Well, the needle would go and we'd hear the music, right? Well, that's how our brain is. Those grooves are the neural pathways. And what creates a neural pathway? Anything that is habitually patterned. You've got this neural pathway. It keeps creating the groove. And that neural pathway then creates our habits. Our habits create the neural pathways. That is a never-ending loop. The good news is our brain, again, has tremendous neuroplasticity. The neural pathways can change. They are not permanent. But what is happening when someone is continuing to re-engage in video gaming and cybersex, social media, the neural pathway loop is becoming more and more imprinted. When the neural pathways are activated repeatedly, as they are when the cortisol, adrenaline, and dopamine surge occurs, then the pathways get exhausted. They get tired. So what happens? They need more of that hit in order to feel good. The individual has a harder time getting stimulated from the natural environment around them and from relationships. That's why when kids get really stuck in digital device time, they don't want to spend time with you. They don't want to spend time with their friends because that's boring. This is much more exciting. That biochemical cocktail is captivating. What happens as a result? Well, there's deficits in goal setting, there's deficits in motivation and follow through. There's a lessened ability to think critically, analytically, and creatively. Remember, what little they have of the prefrontal cortex shuts down. They also have a difficult time with delayed gratification. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it right now. Many tests are showing that violent video games affect behavior. It's more aggressive, there's more physical arousal, there's more aggressive thoughts and cognitions, and this one concerns me the most, there is a desensitization of empathy. When kids are involved overmuch in video games, especially violent video games, their capacity for empathy lessens. What's empathy? Me sitting with you and having a sense of what your feelings are in conjunction with what you're sharing with me, or your life history, or what happened today. And if I can't have empathy for that, then I don't care about you as a human being. If I can't have empathy for other, then I can't have empathy for self. One study of excessive gamers, the brain imaging was done with, I already shared this one. This was powerful. I just want to share it again. This is about the brain activity of excessive gamers matched to the brain activity of hardcore drug addicts and alcoholics. And it showed that activity the moment they thought about playing. Now, I want to be sure that you're not hearing me say, go home and throw all of the games away. I am not saying that. This isn't an all or nothing. This is about balance and you understanding what's going on for yourself, for your children, and your grandchildren. This is about you being educated. I have so much to share and so little time. Cell phones. A 2015 study showed that cell phones are checked in America 8 billion times a day. 8 billion times a day. The average adult checks their phone 200 times per day. Once they're home, the average adult checks it every 6 minutes. I'm not talking about kids. I'm talking about us. There's several things at play here. The signaling theory, the alerts, the notification, the ding, the vibration on a mobile phone can cause the individual to have an uncontrollable urge to check it. I see that all the time in my office. That's why I tell them, leave your devices outside. Related stimuli of digital devices. There are cues and situations, you see the phone, and you wonder, have I gotten a call? Have I gotten a text message? Did someone send me something exciting? I have to tell you what's really happening. This is intermittent reward. Every time you get a text message, someone's thinking about me. Every time you get an email, wow, they just thought about me, or they want me to know about this great deal. That's an intermittent reward. The dopamine surge is at play in every area of the cyber world. Every area. Social networking. Remember, the ages of kids, 12 to 18, they're working on their identity. 18 to 40, they're working on intimacy or isolation. Why is this important? Well, if 12 to 18 is working on identity, and they're on the cyber world, and it's showing them who they should be, and that who they are is not enough, are they going to form their identity as to how God created them, or are they going to form their identity as to how the world wants them to be? 18 to 40. Let's say they've already begun this habit of being on social media, gaming, the cyber world constantly. Are they going to do that with other people, or are they going to do that in isolation, in relationship with the screen? Ages 18 to 40 is about developing intimacy or isolation. It's a huge field that has not even been studied yet, but it's so important. Okay, so the dopamine is released with social media. It spikes that pleasure surge. Social media is easier than real relationships. You know, if I'm online, I don't have to worry about the dirty dishes in the kitchen. If I'm online, I don't need to worry about dealing with the emotional issues between me and my husband or a friend or my kids. I'm in a different world. And if I don't like what I'm seeing, I can go to another site and find something else. One of the things that the internet has been called is the infinite net. It's infinite. You can constantly find something. It's never ending. And there is something powerful, chemically induced power of always looking. But what happens to the person? I mentioned to you that we're seeing a spike in anxiety among teenagers. That comes from the anxiety of always looking and never finding. Always wanting and never having enough. There's never a sense of completion. There's a fear of missing out. We're faced with more possibilities than we can handle, and it's called overchoice. It creates a state of insufficiency. This isn't just about kids. This is for all of us. Because remember, it's about letting you know what you should have, how you should feel, and how you should look. It creates a state of insufficiency. I should do more. I should be more. I'm just not enough. Texting. I worked with one couple. Their only form of communication is texting. How do you think their relationship is? Texting requires no emotional interaction, no voice tone, no body language, no eye contact. People can communicate with fewer inhibitions and less interpersonal commitment. Teens, on the average, text 109.5 times a day. Now, am I saying don't text? If I didn't text to tell my husband I'm going to be an hour late, he'd be worried. That's what texting is for. It's invaluable. This is where I am. This is when I'll be there. I'm thinking about you. But to have conversations, you miss a tremendous amount of interpersonal connectedness. Getting Instagram photos or Facebook posts and getting the like hits fuels self-esteem. Joining an online community gives a sense of belonging. Online anonymity gets a false sense of safety. I can say anything, I can do anything. We're seeing a rise in narcissistic behavior that's pathological in young adults. Pathological. Because of the anonymity, they can be more self-focused and say things they would never say in the real world without fear of consequences. It leads us to promote ourselves and to measure our worth and value by likes instead of by relationships. Novelty triggers those dopamine hits. The self-disclosure in communication also creates a feel-good feeling for us in our brain, similar to that hit of dopamine. Not the same, but similar. And so online conversations where you really don't know the person, but you're opening up and you're sharing all this deep, intimate stuff, it's going to make you feel good. What does that have to say about online dating? Well, that's another talk. A whole big nother talk. There's already a predisposition to obsessive compulsive behavior. If there is already that predisposition in an individual, then obsessive compulsive behavior online will escalate dramatically. Remember, addiction is a form of seeking, whether it's Coke, Google searches, porn, social media. The dopamine is firing. It's keeping that human being in a constant state of alert and expectation, and cyberspace is an infinite portal for searching. Now, let's talk about cybersex. I want to be sure and allow plenty of time for questions. What are the neurobiological effects of pornography? First of all, I have worked with hundreds of individuals that are addicted to pornography. What I see is about 85% of recovery and health and a returned life. One of the greatest misconceptions about pornography is that it is about the image. It's not. It's the search. It's the dopamine hit. The individuals that I talk to, and I ask them the question, so what are you, as you keep going online from one image after another, what is it you want? And they almost always say, the perfect image. Have you found it yet? No. It isn't the image, it's the perfect image. They're getting the dopamine hit from the search. Intermittent reward. Again, this is the chemical that is the most powerful chemical our body creates. And God intended for us to get dopamine surges as we spend time with other human beings, as we walk outside, as we see the sunset, as we feel the breeze, as we have an intimate, emotionally connected communication with our spouse, with our daughter, with our son, with our neighbor. That's what will give us that dopamine surge. When you get this artificial push of the dopamine surge, it realigns everything in your system. So, again, pornography isn't about the image, guys. It is about the dopamine surge. You get addicted to the dopamine surge. So, a chemical overload occurs. Again, releases dopamine, oxytocin, norepinephrine, and serotonin. These are all mood elevating and pain relieving elements. These different chemicals that our body creates, it's amazing. So dopamine goes to the reward center. Oxytocin, what's oxytocin? Well, that is what is created in a woman's body when she is holding her baby and feeding or nursing the baby. That chemical is for bonding. The purpose of oxytocin is to bond. So if oxytocin is released when a person is viewing pornography, what are they going to be bonding with? The images. Norepinephrine, again, it's that feel-good chemical. Serotonin, what does serotonin do when it's released? It increases the need and the activity of compulsive behavior. So if you've got too much serotonin, you're going to be more obsessive and compulsive in your behavior. What a volatile cocktail. All of this goes to the reward center of the brain. It tires out the neural pathways. You need more to experience the same feeling. You've heard this before. It happens with video gaming. It happens with social media. It just happens to a higher degree with pornography. Nothing gives the same high that this chemical cocktail gives. When the person doesn't have it, they feel depressed, empty, numb, desensitized, and then they feel a tremendous amount of shame. And then they feel a tremendous amount of guilt. And they want these feelings to go away. Well, what's going to make these feelings go away? A dopamine surge. Let's go back online. And they get the same dopamine surge. They feel great for about this amount of time. And then they move away from it. And then they feel depressed and shame and disconnected and numb. And they start thinking about going online. And what we know with brain imaging, the dopamine surge happens when they just think about it. The preoccupation is there, and then they go online. And the feelings and the emptiness fuels the cycle. This synthetic sexuality is like eating Twinkies. How many in here has ever had a Twinkie? Do they make Twinkies anymore? Yeah. Well, think of what you love more than a Twinkie. For me, it's cheesecake. So, this synthetic sexuality is like eating cheesecake all the time or Twinkies all the time. After a while, you don't have an appetite for real food. You don't want it. It doesn't taste the same. Salad, it's not so good. But a dopamine rush that comes from this artificially enhanced and modified sexual food, in this case cybersex, makes you feel great temporarily. So what happens to the mind when 12 on up, young men's minds, when they view porn? They're being rewired to demand unrealistic levels of novelty, stimulation, and excitement. They're becoming out of sync with the real world and real world relationships. They find it difficult to focus on relationships with themselves or with others, and certainly with God. There is an eroding appreciation of the unaltered human form. I want you to hear that because that's critical. There is an eroding appreciation of the unaltered human form. Cybersex becomes the primary sex education forum. There's a tremendous amount of information now in my field that we're hearing from young women and young men in their developing sexuality and as they are getting engaged and married, is that they do not know how to make love. They do not know how to have an emotionally intimate sexual relationship. They know how to make porn in the bedroom. Because pornography is becoming the #1 sex educator in our world and our society. Changing the sexual template. Each of us, by the time we're 10, 11, or 12, we have a sexual template that is already formed. One of the things that we're seeing in my field is that different types of sexuality online can begin to change that sexual template. Folks, that's really serious stuff. The other thing, I mentioned it earlier.
Could you repeat that one little phrase?
Yes, is that the sexual template, that is what arouses us, what we are attracted to, and that is often set in place between 11 and 12 years of age. What we are seeing is that because of the wide variety of different forms of sexuality all along a continuum that used to be taboo to even consider is now accessible with the movement of the icon, is beginning to affect change in some individuals' sexual template. I mentioned earlier about PIDE, that's porn-induced erectile dysfunction. We're seeing that in epidemic forms among young men. Now, by the way, you need to know also that it takes 30 to 60 days of no porn and no compulsive masturbation for that to be turned around. That's the good news. Nothing is permanent if people get help and we talk about this stuff. As human beings, we hunger for stimulation and gratification. Watching pornography is like watching action movies all the time, and then leaving the theater and believing that the real world is going to be like that action movie. It's not. It's just the real world. But if we watch action movies all the time, the real world is going to be very boring and dull. And that's what's occurring. Remember, the patterned neural pathways are created by reoccurring habits. Then the reoccurring habits are controlled by those neural pathways, and the cycle continues. There are 3 different categories of people who use the internet for sexual pursuits. This is really important for you to grasp. There's the recreational users. That's the discovery group. That's an individual who goes online and out of curiosity or entertainment purposes. These individuals are not usually seen as having problems associated with their online behaviors. It's what used to happen when a 12-year-old kid would get National Geographic, and he'd look for the images of the women that weren't wearing tops, or the Sears catalog, or Victoria's Secret. Except all of those forms stopped. The internet is endless. So this is the discovery group. The next, at-risk users. Individuals who may never have developed a problem with online sexual activities if it had not been for the availability of the internet. If their pattern of use continues, it could become problematic. At-risk users. College kids that are bored. Individuals that are already compulsive with video games. Individuals that have depression, anxiety, a variety of different mental health issues. Make them more at risk to go away into the porn usage and get the dopamine hits that will make them feel alive. The third is the sexually compulsive users. These individuals already have a problematic relationship with sexual expression. There's what's called the 3A engine of cybersex: anonymous, accessible, and affordable. That really powers the engine. It's anonymous. You can go on it, no one knows that you are the president of the corporation, the pastor of the church, the principal of the school, or someone that's just walking down the street. Anonymity. It's accessible. You can access it from your cell phone, from your iPad, any place, anytime. It's affordable. It's free. Cybersex comes in many, many forms. Internet porn, sex chats, sexting. By the way, in California, we are seeing a real issue with young adults and teenagers that are sexting. And what that is that they are taking pictures of themselves and sending it to their friends of genitalia, very provocative shots. First of all, nothing is safe online. Remember the trollers that are trolling to get images? And what is happening is, in the state of California, it can be considered child porn, and they are taking it up before the court. So this is very important to educate your children about. Smartphone apps, webcam apps, social media, and anime, which is cartoons. What are some of the problematic results of cybersex? Instant gratification is reinforced. I want it now. Sexual fantasies that normally would be eradicated and extinguished are fueled. There's an escalation effect. What used to be enough is no longer enough. I need more and more and more. There becomes an increased tolerance level. Desensitization. What was once shocking, what was once taboo, illegal, repulsive, or immoral, can now be seen as commonplace and acceptable. The sexual behavior depicted on the screen becomes legitimized. Acting out sexually to do what we've seen and what we viewed. Again, the change in the arousal template. Spiritual questioning, spiritual doubting, shaming, self-condemnation, a fragmented life. I became a believer when I was 15 years old. I had run away from home. My stepfather was an alcoholic. I hid in the closet until he passed out, and then I left home. I'd been away from home for a week. My mother was in the hospital dying. I had no place to go. I'd never been to church. I'd never read the Bible. Because I hated men so much, for a variety of reasons, I thought I wanted to become a nun, because I thought they hated men. I went to school the last day of the week on Friday, and I went to my English teacher, who had read a lot of what I had written that was very suicidal, and I said, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm at the end of my rope. And he suggested that I go to a group of girls that were meeting after school. It was a Bible study. I'd never been to a Bible study, connected with Young Life. And I went because I hadn't eaten and I didn't know where I was going to spend the night. So I went and I walked into the room, and all these girls were wearing, you know, the skirts that matched the sweaters. This was my era. And the little Mary Jane shoes. Now Mary Jane doesn't mean shoes. And I looked at all of these girls and I thought, boy, am I in the wrong place. These are all the popular girls. I had long hair that covered my face. I wore all black. I had green eyeliner, green eyeshadow, and green mascara. I looked like I had moss growing from my eyes. Identity, remember? That's what you try to do. You need to find your identity. I sat down and they were talking about this person, Jesus Christ. Only time I had ever heard that name was when my stepfather had yelled at me, and he was mad and angry. And they were talking about a personal relationship with Christ, that he's come and he can give you abundant life. Well, I didn't need abundant life. I didn't know what that meant. But then one of the girls said, yeah, but the verse that means the most to me is that I will never leave you or forsake you. And when I heard that, it was the first time I'd ever heard from anyone that they wouldn't leave me or forsake me. It meant everything to me. And so I thought I'd test this out and see. So I asked Christ to take me and to give me purpose and to not leave me. I went back home that night and told my stepfather what I had done. He said I was a fool. He said I was stupid. Best thing he could have said. I knew I was on the right path. I cut my hair short. You could see my face. I started leading Bible studies on campus. Christ changed my life. It's why I do what I do. It's why I talk to the people I talk to. I went to seminary and got a graduate degree, a master's in marriage and family counseling. My husband said I should share this. And the year before I graduated, the school counselor said, so what are you going to do? What area are you going to go into? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to work with men. I don't want to talk about sexuality. And I probably want to work in the church. It would be real safe. So, I am a leading sex addiction therapist. Doesn't God have a sense of humor? I bring all of this up because the best people I've ever met in my life are the people that come to my office. They come because they want freedom and growth and a chance. They want to have healing in their relationships. They want to see what real life can be. And what I see constantly is that freedom. Because this compulsive behavior online is not a spiritual issue. I've had pastors in my offices. I've had missionaries in my office. It affects us spiritually, but it is not a spiritual issue. It will not go away with prayer alone. It will not go away with Bible study. You need to be in a healing community. You need to understand what happens biochemically. You need to be in a 12 in a 12-step group, celebrate recovery. You need to work and understand what your historical trauma is, because every person I've ever worked with that has had any issues with cybersex, they have trauma. It may not look like trauma. One individual came to my office, a wonderful, wonderful young man, and his trauma, he stuttered as a kid. He was on the outside. He was marginalized. Everyone made fun of him. Where did he feel acceptable? When he went online. He could make anyone love him online. Kids that have autism, that are on the autistic spectrum, kids that have ADD, ADHD, they are the at-risk kids. Kids that are bored, kids that have anxiety disorders. And let me tell you, when I talk to parents and their kids are doing 3 sports at one time, and they have activities every night of the week, and no one ever sits down and has dinner together, these kids are going to have high anxiety because our world is expecting so much of them. So these are the ones that are at risk that we need to be aware of. So let's talk about an 11-year-old kid. He goes online, he views, and he sees this image online. He just typed in something for a school paper. By the way, pornographers buy old sites that are no longer being used, such as, well, I'm not going to say what as, because I don't want you to go there. Buy old sites that are old and not used, and then they are filling them with pornography. So school-age kids will type in something very benign, very neutral, and pornography will pop up. Remember, their goal is to have kids by 11 years old. So this 11-year-old boy sees something online, it's pornography, has a biological reaction to it that his mind doesn't understand. Is he likely to come and talk to his parents? No. He's embarrassed. He's ashamed. He doesn't even know what he just saw, but something happened in his body. And if he does, if the parent's reaction is critical or in shock or judgmental, if they shame them, you can be sure that kid will never go and talk to his parents again. It'll go underground and it will live in a place of deep shame. Instead of talking about the existence of porn, instead of talking about it as a moral or a religious or a spiritual problem, we must talk to young people about the use of it, what it does, what it is and what it isn't. When you sit down with your young son or daughter, you need to talk about what's happening, how long have if they've ever accessed porn in a non-judgmental attitude. You just sit with them or go for a walk. What type of images, if they've seen any, has the usage or the themes escalated? There was one situation, it breaks my heart. When there is any addiction in the home, such as the husband or the father, several things happen. The husband, let's say he's in recovery, may be too embarrassed to talk to his sons about pornography. The wife, who has lived with her husband with this addiction, may have too much anger. And so she finds out that her 13-year-old son is masturbating. She has this huge reaction. He's going to turn out just like his father. And so she shames him, and she judges him, and she has this huge emotional reactivity to him. What is that 13, 14-year-old boy going to think and feel? That he's bad, that he's wrong, that he's awful. And it's going to fuel the need for the dopamine surge so that he feels better. So the most important thing that we need to do is to recognize what our own relationship with healthy sexuality is about. We need to start talking about it in our churches, in our Sunday school classes. We need to deal with healthy sexuality. If your child has any problems with online porn, again, no reaction. And if you've had any history in your life, your spouse's life, your family's life, share with them. Tell them your story. Let them know it doesn't have to be this way. And then ask them if they're open to an experiment. 2 weeks without any access to cybersex. If they have a problem following through with that, then you need to seek some help. There are people that can help. Be proactive. Don't wait to talk about them. There are 2 sites that are excellent. They're going to be in your resource. Pull out your resource, and let me just go over a little bit of things that you've got there. Okay, what is a parent to do? Don't use digital technology as a babysitter. Engage with your child. The American Association of Pediatrics recommends no screen time until your child is 2 years or older. That's way too young, folks. Way too young. I had a young woman in my office this week, and she said her phone wasn't working anymore. And I said, why? And she said, because my 6-month-old keeps holding it and sucking on it. Wait before your child is 2 or 3 years old before any screen time. Monitor your own screen time. Your children will learn from observing you. Be aware of marketing claims for apps or games. By the way, baby Einstein proved it does nothing to help children. Nothing cognitively, except get them used to being on the screen. Some may cause developmental or social delays. Buy toys that add to your children and grandchildren's imagination, not screen time. Supervise young children when they're online. Have parental control software, filters and blockers. Make this a way of life from early on. Be aware that as soon as a parental control is installed, your teenager will go to YouTube and figure out how to get around it. But I'm going to give you some other information. There are some teenagers in Fresno that hate me. Take digital breaks. Time with no screen time for anyone in the family. No digital devices at meal times. Talk regularly about online risks. Teach them about decision making. A great site, a resource, is decisioneducation.org. One of the most valuable gifts we can give our children is to help them understand how to make decisions, because they are faced with decisions constantly online, moment after moment. Talk about healthy sexuality, STDs. Don't wait till they're teens. Make information available to them and be approachable. I have to tell you, my poor children, I've been in this field for almost 30 years, and I am a compulsive reader. I just am. So I'd have all these books around my house, right? And the boys, when they were in high school, they'd have kids come over, and they were involved in different activities. And before the kids would come over, David would say, "Mom, could you please move your books? You know, we don't want to see all the titles on your books." Recognize that viewing pornography can be normative adolescent behavior. Please don't demonize your children. They are going to be sexually curious. Talk to them. Help them be educated. There are some great books that you can use to help them and to help you. Don't have shame or judgment. Talk about consent, compliance, and coercion. This is critical, especially with your daughters and your sons. This is the most important book you can get. It is called How to Talk to Your Teen About Cybersex and Pornography in the Digital Age. You've got it on your resource at the bottom of the page. It just came out this month. This is an incredibly helpful book. She talks about the difference between consent, compliance, and coercion. Excellent information. Everyone should have this book. Set rules about online access. Limit your child's access to sexual content. Talk to them. Do you hear a theme here? Talk to them, talk to them, talk to them. There was a great study done by Dr. Wierzinski with 556 middle school kids and their parents, and the style of the parents with digital devices and education, and which ones were the most useful for their children. There were some that only put filters and blocks on and never talked about it. There were some that didn't do filters and blocks and never talked about it. There were some that only talked about it, and never did filters and blocks. Then there were the parents that did filters and blocks and they talked about it. Guess which one really was beneficial? This one. Filters, blocks, and talking to your kids about it. Be prepared to face your child's frustrations and anger when you say it is time to turn off devices. I've had parents in my office say, well, I don't want him mad at me. Well, I don't want him in my office in 10 years. Let him be mad at you. I'd love it if I'd be out of business. You're the parent. You're the grown-up. Say to your child, my job is to protect your mind, your future, your spiritual growth, and your relationships. There will be inevitable withdrawal symptoms when there is overstimulation and dysregulation. What does that word mean? It means that everything's out of kilter. You're getting these dopamine surges. You can't regulate your own emotions. It will be withdrawal symptoms. Cultivate attachment with your children. Observe your children and be active and involved. Let's talk about the next page, filters and blockers. Net Nanny, it's the first one on your list. It's a great filter. The next one that I highly recommend is Covenant Eyes. It's about the 7th one down. It is a tracker. What that does is it gives you a printout of every site that the person on that device has accessed. So you've got a blocker, a filter, and a tracker. Then the third thing, so these are on the devices. The circle by Disney, it's at the bottom of your page. Net Nanny and Covenant Eyes, probably, I believe they are a monthly fee. The circle is a one-time purchase. It's $99. It hooks up to your router, to your internet. Every parent should have one. And what this does is it sets limits on social media time. It can turn off the internet in the house at bedtime and turn it on again. It shows which site each child has been on and how long they've been on it. You can choose what sites to allow, and it also filters. The reason I would recommend Net Nanny is because when the kids leave the house with their devices, the circle no longer is affecting any use. So those are the three things. It's worth the money to keep your home and your kids safe. Let's talk about resources, and then we're going to do some questions. Oh, I'm not going to go over this with you. This is just information. It's different social media sites because you need to be educated as to what sites your kids are on. This is already obsolete. There are many more sites. This changes every minute. And Snapchat is one that's really creating a lot of problems. Resources, because it's secret. You can say something and then it disappears. However, Snapchat was hacked about a month ago. Nothing is secret. Everything is accessible online. Video game safety. Video games and your kids, great book. These websites, I really recommend Common Sense Media. It's a must-have website. I get information emailed to me daily. On the resources, the first page, it starts off with video game safety. So, Common Sense Media is very, very important to have. Under social media, this book, Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, it's an excellent book. It's a little bit heavier to read, but it's really helpful to understand about the teenage brain. Reset Your Child's Brain is another good book, but this is the best. Enough is Enough, Protecting Our Children Online. The rules and the ages of the different developmental stages online that I copied here came from Enough is Enough. It's a wonderful resource. And then under pornography. Okay, this book is excellent. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, Porn-Proofing Your Children. It is written for a parent to talk to their children, to go through it. It covers the neurobiological, and it helps kids And it helps parents talk about something that's really difficult for them to talk about. Great book. This is another excellent book. There aren't many books out there yet that deals with this. This is talking to a child about his father's porn addiction. This is very useful. It's called Daddy's Secret Cedar Chest, and the individual went into recovery. So this is very beneficial. There are two sites, well, there are several. Porn-Proof Kids, okay, Stop the New Drug. It's a great website. I'm sure that a lot of the young adults here are aware of it. They've got wonderful information. Fortify. This is an online recovery program for teens and adults. I contacted them. I didn't want to pretend I was a teenager boy, so I contacted the developers of this. They let me go online. I went through the whole process. I went through each of their talks. It's excellent, and it's free for kids. I think for adults it's $35. Our Tribe is also another one that's excellent. The letter R, I don't think I wrote it down on that. The letter R-Tribe. It's a wonderful community of individuals that are in recovery. There are several different sites and YouTube presentations that are great for you to watch. Watch them first and then watch them with your kids. The Science of Pornography Addiction, a mind map for sex and porn is excellent. And then TED Talks, these are also wonderful. Another good book is called The Cyber Effect by Mary Akin. This is a heavier book to read, but it covers everything. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I understand that there is a TV show, CSI, crime, and what's it called, guys?
There's several.
Yes, well, the one that she is the main, it's made after her, is CSI Cyberworld. And it's about her and what she does. But this is an excellent book to have, very interesting. Okay, boy, I'm really done. Questions?